If you've ever stared at the thin line where two tiles meet, or the hairline crack that runs across a painted wall, you've met the seam. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't beg attention. It just waits, almost bored, for your eyes to settle. And yet, if the seam flickers, if the edge shifts by even a breath, you feel something quiet and undeniable move in you. The world doesn't fall apart. It refocuses. You are not leaving reality. You are entering the part of it that usually keeps the lights low. The field opens in the width of a blink. Don't look away. There's a lab somewhere, anywhere, with a cheap desk lamp, scuffed benches, and the faint smell of ethanol that lives in old plastic. A grad student sits with 2 monitors and a clipboard, trying to coax signal out of noise. The data is stubborn. The figures hover just above the threshold where the mind can start to believe them. In the corner, a coil hums. The student watches the graph pulse up, down, steadier, then smeared by what looks like jitter. Quantum noise is the lab's nickname for impatience. You breathe, reset the gain, choose a tighter window. Slowly, coherence whispers its arrival. The line becomes a line. You remember that observation is not passive. You change the experiment by the way you watch. On the night sidewalks, a couple leans against a storefront window after the last bus leaves. One has had too much coffee, the other too little sleep. Their sentences come out like curls of steam, curling once and fading into the cool air. A minor argument dissolves into shared quiet, and suddenly the reflection in the glass shows them not as two strangers negotiating comfort, but as one small constellation spaced just so. Entanglement isn't romance for them. It's logistics calendars, the way one person's schedule collapses another's choices into a narrower lane. Then the streetlight flickers. The seam is here too, between one glance and the next. They both notice. No one speaks. The sensation lands a field of attention, wraps them in the same frame. The seam is not an edge you cross with a leap. It is a calibration that happens in the pupils, then in the body, then in the room you thought you were only in to pass the time. The ribcage doesn't expand differently. It remembers it can. The shoulders don't relax. They release the idea that they alone hold everything up. This is the small science of posture. When the spine finds its quiet, the brain's predictive engine is forced to check its work. You're not trying to be spiritual. You're checking the model against the moment. Uncertainty is the room where freedom breathes, and tonight there is more oxygen than you thought. At your desk, the cursor blinks with a patience that is cruel and kind. You planned to write 3 pages. Instead, you wrote half a sentence, then deleted it because it sounded like a brochure pretending to be wisdom. You open a window and listen, not to the city, to the low-tide rustle at the edges of thought. The mind runs in superposition more often than we admit. Multiple drafts of you coexist, the one who leaves the chair, the one who pushes, the one who checks the fridge, as if it hides a door. Choice collapses this array into one path, and you already know which one you'll pick by the way your hand hovers above the keys. The seam flickers. You don't force it. You soften the brow, the jaw, the inner commentary. The next sentence arrives as if from another room where you've been working all along. There's a story you tell yourself about attention, that it is a spotlight you drag across a stage. But sometimes attention behaves like a tide. It moves you. It doesn't ask permission. You surf or you swallow. You can't command the water to become stairs. Keep the metaphor honest. You are not a wave in the ocean of a mysterious universe that loves you personally. You are a person with a nervous system that registers patterns and adapts. And yet when the seam flickers, when the flicker becomes a rhythm, you sense how the body and the world sync. Coherence isn't magic. It is simply what happens when noise stops steering. In the lab, the student resets the apparatus after a lunchtime conversation about family. Nothing dramatic. Just a few sentences about a father who used to listen to late-night radio and fall asleep in his chair. The student touches a photo tucked under the keyboard, then returns to the protocol, and it's different now. The numbers are not kinder, but the mind that reads them has widened its field. This is not superstition. It is the actuality that meaning changes the way signal is perceived, and that perception changes the way decisions are made, and decisions change the data you collect next. Observation is a form of participation because you are never just an observer. Your presence shapes which variable matters today. Imagine a city block at 2 a.m. A delivery driver parks by a hydrant, hazard lights ticking like a metronome for hurry. The driver shoulders a stack of boxes heavier than the night and steps into a stairwell painted the exact color of resignation. On the sixth step, the bulb hums, then hiccups. For one half breath, the landing is a different place. Dust motes hang like stars in a cheap planetarium. The driver pauses, one beat, two, and feels the whole day re-index. Not better, not worse, simply less singular. Attention entangles you with what you notice. The driver is now bound to a fact. Even in a stairwell with gum fossils and chipped paint, the field between moments hums. The boxes do not get lighter, but the carrying does. We don't mostly need grand philosophy to touch this. We need practical friction. The wood grain under the palm on a banister, the click of a door, catch the way dry air turns the first glass of water into a rescue. The seam shows up exactly where habit thins. You can train for this. Not with a plan to ascend, with a plan to look. Choose an ordinary object and study it until the mind's label falls off. This is not a mystical ritual. It is the plain work of recalibrating the observer. Think of a chair. When does it stop being chair and start being wood joints, force, compression, surface? When does it stop being even those and become the sum of your experience, sitting, rising, waiting? You move like a wave in the room of your life. You decide like a witness. The chair doesn't change. You do. What is the seam then? Not a portal. Not a trick. It is the border of your predictive map. The brain saves energy by guessing correctly. It succeeds so often that it mistakes expectation for reality. But when the guess stumbles even slightly, the seam flickers. This is why novelty can feel like threat and relief in the same pulse. The body prepares to defend, the mind readies to learn. If you stay, both impulses can be right without fighting. The field between thoughts hums quietly. Your system widens to include what it first tried to reject. You are not transcending. You are updating. In that same lab, the student's phone buzzes with a news alert that would ordinarily derail a whole afternoon. Today it registers, but does not take the helm. The student notes the disturbance, marks a timestamp, and keeps going. This is self-respect disguised as discipline. Each day is a long experiment in not letting the loudest signal become the only one. Entropy demands that everything slide toward scatter. You don't fight entropy. You negotiate. You build small pockets of order: coffee in a clean mug, a bench wiped dry, a list crossed through that allow complex tasks to stabilize. Coherence is rented, not owned. On a bus ride home, a child sits with a plastic bag of new pencils and a folded handout explaining the phases of the moon. Their grandmother reads the same paragraph 3 times, not because she doesn't understand, but because she enjoys the ritual of again. The child asks whether the moon follows them. The grandmother smiles, explains parallax without naming it, tracing the window with her finger. The bus turns. The angle changes. The moon plays a different game now, slipping between branches, ducking behind a billboard. The child feels the seam, the distance between their private story and the shared geometry of the world. The discovery doesn't diminish wonder, it deepens it. Reality is stranger and kinder when it won't submit to your first explanation. At midnight, you stand at your kitchen sink, both hands around a cold glass. There is a rumor of rain in the air, though the forecast stayed neutral. You think about someone you've been avoiding, not from malice, from fear that the conversation will collapse too many possible futures into one, and you're not ready to lose the ones where it all goes your way. The seam flickers at the edge of the decision. You can put the glass down and go to bed. Or you can text, "Could we talk tomorrow?" The physics is simple. A signal, a path, a response, a new path. But everyone knows the heartbeat that taps out the seconds before you press send, the way a body makes percussion out of risk. You press. The field opens the width of a pulse. Some mornings the seam is in the mirror. Your face looks like it belongs to you, but also to the version of you that didn't get enough sleep for the last 3 years. You tilt your head and see your parent hiding in the angle of your cheek, a friend hiding in your half smile, a stranger hiding in your eyes. Wave or particle, you are both pattern and arrival. The toothbrush is an anchor to the smallest of sciences: contact, friction, removal of debris, prevention of entropy in a mouth you rarely thank. You rinse and watch the water spiral. You remember that uncertainty is not a flaw. It is the condition that allows you to choose again today. In the workshop of a clock repairer, tiny screws keep a small civilization in time. The repairer's hands move at a speed that looks slow but isn't. It is precise. Springs relax, and retention under the lamplight. When the second hand stutters, the repairer listens without being dramatic. The sound is slightly louder when the hand crosses the numeral 4, a seam. The pivot is dry. The oil is old. The remedy is not a revelation. It is a drop. The repairer dabs with a patience the world gave up on about 10,000 emails ago. The hand glides. The room exhales. You don't need to be a watchmaker to learn the lesson. Some flickers are invitations to tend. Others are warnings to stop forcing. Knowing which is the day's work. Lived attention is not a monk's vow or a guru's brand. It's the cook who knows when the onions are ready by the scent that rises when the water is gone and the sugars begin to brown. It's the builder who runs a hand along a stud and hears the hollow that says the wall will echo if you don't add support. It's the nurse who notices a color in the skin that isn't the charted value, but is the story no monitor tells. Attention entangles you with the world to the point that you cannot claim you were absent from its outcomes. Responsibility follows naturally. It isn't a guilt weight, it's a lever. The seam flickers in meetings too. Someone says a sentence with all the right words and none of the right weight. You feel the misalignment like a tooth slightly too tall. If you pretend not to notice, the project inherits that wobble and amplifies it in delivery. If you name it kindly, the room can reset. No mysticism here, just gradients of honesty. The field opens between defensiveness and curiosity. Choose which side you stand in by how you frame the question. What are we missing can be a door or a knife depending on tone. The physics of teams tends toward inertia. It also rewards the smallest applied force when timed well. The mind loves drama and hates boredom. Sometimes the seam flickers simply because you are tired of your own genre. You could scroll, and maybe you will. But before you do, pick one object, a pen, a spoon, a seam itself in the edge of a book, and return to the simplest study. What is here? When I stop grabbing superposition again. The pen is writing tool, roll, toy, lever, chewed plastic, secret, drumstick. You collapse these possibilities by what you do next with your hand. That act is not metaphysics. It is the daily physics of becoming. You do not need to make it holy to make it worthy. Consider how often you think in rehearsed phrases. I'm just tired. It is what it is. That's just me. Phrases become rails, and rails keep you safe until they keep you small. The seam flickers when a sentence you've said 100 times fails to satisfy you on the 101st. Do not panic. You're not breaking. You're updating again. The observer in you, clearer now, can ask a better question. What would I notice if I were new here? Not stupid. New. The brain's love of pattern is a gift. Give it better patterns. Let coherence be a practice, not a posture. When you turn off the lamp and the room becomes mostly gradients, you may feel a soft panic rise. A small animal inside wants every corner lit, every variable pinned. You don't oblige. You cooperate with uncertainty because you've learned its secret. Not knowing keeps the room live. You listen. The refrigerator coughs and quiets. A car passes and writes a brief line of light across the ceiling. Old questions line up behind your eyes. Did you say enough? Did you see enough? Did you miss the signal? You know the answer is untidy. You know that in the morning, you'll find evidence of both care and blindness. You know that this is how humans do their experiments messily, earnestly, with more heart than capacity. There's an old park you visit on days when the noise inside turns to foam. Trees that shouldn't have survived the city have carved a truce with the air. Squirrels run supply chains like tiny executives. A jogger passes with a rhythm that makes you aware of your own feet. You sit on a bench and notice the small industry of ants executing logistics under your knee. You are not the protagonist here. You are a participant in a system that does not need your permission to be beautiful. The field between your thoughts and the ground thins until it touches. The seam flickers again, not as a warning but as an acknowledgement. Arrival is not a place. It is the moment you stop refusing where you are. Somewhere, a musician is practicing scales in a narrow room, not song scales. They run the ladder until muscle and mind finally agree. The fingers become less like separate animals and more like a single organism. The music that will come later is earned here. Attention is an instrument with the same demand. Run the simple passages, not because you love repetition, but because you trust what repetition can build. When you return to your life's themes, care, work, friendship, rest, you are not looping. You are spiraling, widening the orbit with each pass. Wave or particle, you carry momentum and placement. Both matter. When two people are trying to repair, trust the seam lives in the half-second before an answer. One asks a question not to trap, but to understand. The other notices a reflex rise, defend, divert, dismiss. The flicker is there, tiny, honest. If it's met with respect, something shifts that no apology can fake. This is the physics of intimacy. Tiny forces, precisely applied over time. If they stay, not out of duty but choice, coherence can happen between two nervous systems. It's not a guarantee, it's an option. Attention entangles responsibility with tenderness, and both are heavier than they look. Back at the desk, the draft grows into a faithful mess. You resist the urge to summarize your life in a tidy paragraph. Precision is kinder than summary. You keep one sentence that was too plain to impress you because it tells the truth efficiently. You delete the one that glittered because it promised more than it could deliver. Measurement is not only for instruments, it is for ambition. You test your own claims against the world and trim where they fail. Your confidence doesn't swell, it settles. The seam is in your breath too, in the fraction between exhale and inhale where the body is still, not held, empty. The nervous system feels this gap and wants to fill it fast. But if you allow the moment its length, a small democracy happens inside. Muscles vote, to release jaw votes, to unhook chest votes, to drop the armor by 2 millimeters. You don't become ethereal. You become human, at a tolerable volume. The city outside remains the city. The phone remains the phone. You do not need to abandon this world to enter the field. The field is what the world feels like when you stop resisting its texture. The grad student goes home. The delivery driver finishes the route and sits with a sandwich in a parking lot, radio low. The couple at the storefront goes separate ways without drama, texting later about groceries with a warmth that wasn't there before the streetlight hiccuped. The clock repairer turns off the lamp and hears the shop keep time in the dark. The grandmother folds the moon handout and tucks it into a drawer where other small maps wait. None of them would say they had a breakthrough today. But if you asked them to name the moment they almost looked away and didn't, they could. In your own house, a seam waits in the book you have read 3 times and pretend to be done with. You open it to the passage you can't quote but remember by shape. It reads differently now. Not because the ink has changed, but because the observer has. The experiment is ongoing. The margin notes form a time-lapse of who you were. A small superposition of selves layered thinly. You mark a new line with a pencil and promise nothing grand. Only this: when the flicker comes, and it will, you'll meet it. Not with a pose, with a look. Night leans heavier. You turn off one more light than you usually do, and the room becomes a little too honest. The seam at the curtain edge glows where the city leaks in. It's not an omen. It's a boundary that acknowledges its own limits. You stand there longer than comfort advises. The mind suggests distraction, the body suggests bed. The heart suggests you could afford one more minute of simply standing here. A person in a window across the way moves like a shadow practicing a story. We are all doing this every night, preparing for a day we cannot predict, carrying forward what we can hold, letting the rest diffuse back into the background, where it may become useful again. The seam is also in how you speak to yourself when you miss. When you forget the thing you swore you wouldn't, when you snap, when you rush, when you sleep through the call. The flicker is not permission to punish. It is a chance to reroute. Attention doesn't excuse, it includes. It lets the whole of you into the room where decisions are made, not as a jury, but as a witness. You are not a project to improve, not an equation to solve to zero. You are an experiment conducted with care. Failures are data. Data is not the enemy. Use it. Now it's late enough that the air cools even indoors. The glass on the counter sweats a circle that will leave a mark you'll wipe in the morning. You can feel the floor through your feet, the minute sway that tells you the building is a held breath in a larger weather. Somewhere out there, particles pass through your body as if you were porous, which you are. Somewhere inside, a thought you didn't invite settles anyway and becomes part of you. The field between what you meant to be and who you are becomes less combative and more curious. The seam does not disappear. It becomes familiar. You stop treating it like a test and start treating it like a threshold that you can cross with the same ordinary grace you use to move from one room to another. You go to the sink again for water you don't really need. A small ritual. The faucet gives a metallic complaint, then the thin music of a stream. You catch your own reflection in the window, the face that keeps surviving you. For a moment, everything simplifies: the weight of the glass, the angle of your wrist, the cool rising through your palm, the dark around and behind you, carrying the day with minimal commentary. The seam flickers the way a smile almost happens before it does. The room holds. The one who is here holds it back. And for now, for just a breath, that is enough to keep the experiment going. The house settles as if it has opinions. Pipes tick like insects deciding a route through copper. You rest the glass on the counter. Feel the small circle of condensation cool your fingertip, and let the simple physics remind you, a room is a conversation between heat and air, weight and surface. Attention lives in these exchanges. When the seam flickers, it isn't calling you elsewhere. It's inviting you closer to the texture you keep overlooking because you think big is truer than near. Tonight, near is truer. You sit on the floor because chairs sometimes tell you who to be. The floor makes fewer claims. The grain under your palm feels like an archive. There are scratches from moving day one, long line from a dropped box, a constellation of nicks from a chair that insisted on dancing. Your hand maps them like a traveler, learning a coastline by touch. The idea of yourself loosens enough for the weather inside to shift. In the loosening, language becomes honest. You can say, "I am glad to be here," and not pretend it's a performance. You can say, "I am afraid of the conversation I started," and not pretend it's because you're deep. The field between honesty and performance thins, and in that thinning perspective, moves like a tide quietly erasing old footprints. In the morning, light sneaks around the curtain like it has a key. You'd planned to rise earlier. You didn't. The old loop starts to wind up. Judgment, resolve the choreography of becoming perfect starting Monday, but the seam interrupts. If you don't look away, the habit loses its director. You notice the body as it is: one ankle stiff, a shoulder carrying yesterday's bag, a center that wants a slower first step. You give it that. A slower first step, and the day doesn't punish you. You pour coffee and watch the crema swirl into a small galaxy, a spiral that obeys its own logic without asking for metaphor. The mind will try to colonize it anyway with meaning. Let it. Then let it be coffee again. Attention can hold both meaning when it helps, silence when it's kinder. Out on the street, a woman in a reflective vest directs traffic around a water main repair. Her hand signals are their own grammar smooth arc. For slow, precise point. For stop, a gentle wave of permission. Drivers obey because she is clear. The road is opened like a surgical wound. Steam lifts from where the city's heat meets morning air. The woman's face is calm, the way competence is calm. The seam flickers when an impatient horn leans too long, then stutters into apology. She doesn't flinch, doesn't swell. She places her palm higher, as if conducting a measure that must land right for the next one to make sense. She is working in a system that constantly threatens entropy. Her attention makes a temporary pocket of order that allows everyone else to pass through with less friction. If you let it, this scene can rewrite what you mean by power. In a room where people make music, a microphone waits. The singer runs a line again and again, until the vowels align with breath-like teeth seating in their grooves. The seam appears in the sliver between strain and ease. When the note stops, trying to be someone else's memory of it, it lands. The engineer at the board doesn't smile. They mark the take with a small star, not because they are withholding joy, but because this is craft. You can feel the celebration later. Now, the physics of signal and color matter more. Quantum noise in the mind wants to rush to conclusion, to tell a story about excellence before the work is done. The engineer lets the waveforms tell them when the story is true. You can practice this in your non-studio lifestar, the moments that actually land, rather than the ones that sparkle loudest. On a train, two strangers share a table where you can pull down a tiny tray that pretends to be a desk. One wears a suit they don't quite own yet. The other wears a hoodie, whose sleeves remember 100 absent-minded twists. They sit in the seam where small talk could be refuge or trap. The suit asks the hoodie what they do. The hoodie answers with a list of verbs, rather than a noun: build, write, repair, learn. The suit nods, then admits that answering with nouns has been making them feel like a stitched-together resume with a heartbeat. They both laugh, the surprise laugh of people who risked a little honesty and survived. Entanglement can happen at the speed of a remark when attention is clean. For the next 10 minutes, the train becomes less like a tube moving bodies and more like a field where two observers co-define a reality without trying to own it. Return to the lab once the student's advisor drops by with coffee and a look that says concern in a generous dialect. They ask about the smear in last week's plots. The student explains the reboot and the calmer line. The advisor listens as carefully as if the story were oxygen. They don't say good job yet. They ask how the baseline was established, and the student, to their surprise, knows. The small research of the inner weather has been affecting the larger research in their hands. Not because the universe rewards meditation with results, but because attention doesn't partition itself by category. The way you approach your breath leaks into how you approach your problem set. The advisor nods once and leaves the door a little open. This is how trust grows in rooms founded on skepticism, one precise answer at a time. When you sit to write again, the words don't arrive in a parade. They present themselves like volunteers with shy hands. You accept 5, love 3, keep 2. Precision keeps you humble without making you small. Somewhere you read that every decision is a small collapse of possibility, and you repeat the phrase not to look smart, but to steady your hand as it trims the branch you won't climb. In another window, the world tries to convince you that you must have an opinion about everything to be considered alive. You let that window be loud, without letting it choose your next line. Coherence arrives when noise stops steering you. And today your steering wheel feels surprisingly solid, not because the road is smooth, but because you stopped squeezing it hard enough to numb your fingertips. A child plays with a cardboard box, as if it were a universe with a moving roof. They cut a round hole for a moon, then tape a flashlight behind it, and watch a circle of light become a language they don't have words for yet. This is the research we forget as adults, how to let curiosity recruit the nearest object and declare it sufficient. The seam flickers between things and their functions, and the child doesn't look away. They invite their grandmother to see the moon move across the ceiling. The grandmother says, "It looks like a tide turning on a small shore." The child agrees without knowing what that means, and thinks, "Shore, nice word." Entropy will eventually take this box back apart. Tape will surrender, corners will soften. For now, it is a cosmos. There is a friend you have not seen in months. You both carry a backlog of stories like boxes stacked near a door. When you finally meet, you spill 3, they spill 2. And then the seam appears, the space where sharing can deepen beyond recitation or retreat into highlight reels. You let silence carry the conversation for a breath longer than ease allows. No one rushes to fill. The field opens as if it were waiting all along. They tell you the sentence they were hiding behind their other sentences. You don't fix it. You don't fix them. You let the sentence stand and change the air. This is one of the miracles you are allowed to believe in without lying. Listening as participation, observation as a form of care. Lunch is a bowl of something ordinary. You add too much pepper and accept the consequence. A nose that wakes up like a guard dog barking at imaginary threats. The body is a theater whose props are honest spoon bowl steam, a small sting too sharp to ignore. You laugh alone and call it seasoning practice. The seam flickers in this too. An appetite that includes imperfection can feed you on days when excellence is too far to walk to. The mind wants to make this a philosophy immediately. Let it be lunch. Then if philosophy forms later like a sediment, you can use good. If not, you're still fed. A painter stands in front of a wall the city forgot to love. They roll white across the old stains and know better than to hope for a single coat. Primer is repetition disguised as preparation. The seam is obvious, old beneath new history, beneath plan. Every pass changes the wall's future. The painter doesn't say this out loud. They hum the same bar of a song because rhythm is a pocket where attention rests. When color goes on, it is not a statement. It is a repair. In 3 hours, passers-by will take the new wall for granted, which is the point. Not all care asks for witnesses. Coherence rarely advertises. When you scroll later, the world brings you a catalog of seams, a bridge that failed because a bolt that cost $3 wasn't torqued, a bakery that survived because a customer noticed the smell of smoke early, a study suggesting that people who pause before answering are rated as more trustworthy by strangers, a photo of a mechanic's hands black with work holding a tiny broken gear that disabled a machine the size of a room. The mind wants to string these into a narrative about smallness mattering. Let it. Then let the narrative go so the examples can keep being themselves. Meaning is a tool. Don't sleep. With it clutched so tight, you forget how to open your hand. The hospital corridor is too bright in the way corridors must be. A nurse checks vitals and charts numbers that look like a language you'll never learn. They pause before leaving, a pause that adds nothing to payroll metrics and everything to human ones. They look at the patient's face as if it were a sunrise, not because it is beautiful, but because it deserves a quiet second of recognition. The patient exhales a fraction deeper and does not know why. Entanglement is not romance and not mysticism. It is the exchange that happens when systems share information and adjust. Your breath and mine are not metaphors when we stand close. They are air with opinions. In a classroom, a teacher writes uncertainty on the board and leaves the word there long enough for students to become annoyed. Then they ask for examples. A hand goes up, weather. Another, stock markets. A third, whether the person I likes me back. Laughter. The teacher nods, then adds the surprise. What about your own attention? A hush. They talk about how noticing is a variable, not a constant. The seam between thinking and seeing becomes the lesson. The students leave, not with answers, but with a new category to apply. When I look what changes, you return to your project, the one with a deadline and a budget, and people who will notice if the work is clumsy. You sketch a plan on paper because screens sometimes make ideas look finished when there's still daylight saving time off. The plan is reasonable. It also hides a seam, an assumption that two stakeholders will agree because they agreed last time. You circle the assumption like it might be a live wire. You make a call, ask one question, and discover that last week's agreement has evaporated like rain on warm asphalt. You are not stalled. You are early. Observation heads off collapse before the wrong possibility defines you. In a world that pays bonuses for firefighting, you let yourself take a private bow for fire prevention. Evening walks in without knocking. In the laundromat spin cycles, conduct a fugue. A man folds shirts with the kind of focus people usually reserve for trouble. He smooths each sleeve with care, as if difficulty won't find him, if he proves he knows how to make a rectangle behave. The seam flickers when a sock escaped peeks from beneath a machine like a small animal, sneaking a look at the party. He picks it up, pairs it, and smiles, with a lack of triumph that feels like grace. Entropy has no malice. It disperses. You gather. This is the quiet duel of being alive, disorganizing and reassembling, always with less time than you wanted, and more tenderness than you expected. A barista draws a leaf on the milk of a to-go cup because ritual improves exit. The customer looks down, surprised, to be treated as a ceramic when they are clearly a cardboard. They carry the cup like a secret. The leaf will not survive the lid. It doesn't have to. Attention is not wasted when its object is temporary. Most objects are, including you and me, which isn't sad when you stop pretending permanence is a right. The field becomes friendlier when you agree to its terms. A coder chases a bug that refuses the obvious fix. They step away, wash a spoon, watch the way water beads and runs, and remember the note they wrote to themselves in a different problem. The issue might be in the callback. They return to the screen and find the loop that swallowed its own tail like an overeager snake. The seam flickers where the program expected a value that arrived half a beat late. Timing can be truth or trouble. Adjust 3 lines, test, and the system breathes. The coder doesn't throw a party. They write a comment that will save the next person in 6 months, which might be them. Entropy loves documentation gaps. Coherence loves a clear note left in the right place. In the quiet after dinner, the conversation you set in motion earlier answers back, "Yes, we can talk tomorrow." The pulse that tapped out risk earlier now finds a slower beat. You draft a few thoughts, then delete them, because you remember that rehearsing entire dialogues alone creates actors who won't show up to your script. Instead, you jot 2 honest lines: what you hope for, what you will accept. You do not define victory as getting your way. You define it as staying present without turning hard. If that sounds like small ambition, you have not tried it enough times to know how much strength it asks from you. Someone you love is far, and distance turns affection into a long wave with a soft edge. You send an image, a piece of light on your wall, that looks like a continent you could draw with your finger. They send back a sound, a recording of rain on their window, hitting 2 surfaces at once. Entanglement is possible at the speed of attention, which is faster than any delivery service, but slower than impatience. You listen to their rain. They look at your light. Neither of you mentions the ache that comes standard with caring. You carry each other without spectacle. Later, you find yourself in line behind a person who speaks to the cashier with a voice tuned to a lovely kindness. Not syrup. Care. They say thank you as if it were a real word, not a password. The cashier's shoulders drop 2 millimeters in relief. You notice your own turn arriving and decide to borrow the tuning. It is not performance, it is calibration. The seam flickers. You could be efficient and forgettable, or you could be precise and human. You choose human today because it costs almost nothing and yields a return that compounds whether or not you see the ledger. The city gives you a moment where the sky does something baroque. Clouds stack like archives of weather, and light chooses an angle that makes everything too cinematic to believe. You do not take a photo because you decide not to carry every beauty out of its home. You let the moment live where it belongs, in the air, in your retina, in the part of you that is content to be an observer who participates by being changed. You are not hoarding. You are trusting that being touched is enough. Back home, a small repair waits a cabinet door that hangs slightly wrong. You unscrew, nudge, rescrew, test. The hinge complains like an elder, telling a story you didn't ask for. You add a drop of oil, and it quiets, instantly grateful, in the way objects are without memory fully in the present. If you want a theology that doesn't betray science, start here. Tend. Where the world resists, gently respond gently. Where it resists, firmly respect the firmness. Not all doors want to be fixed today, but this one did, and now it closes, with the sound of a sentence that found its period. Before bed, the mind lines up questions for tomorrow, like shoes by a door. What will the meeting require? How will the conversation turn? Which account of you will you need to be in order to pass through the thresholds the day has set up? You smile because the mind thinks its lists are reality. You let it list. You also know that reality will not honor those bullet points, because you will be living in a field that refuses to be completely predicted. Uncertainty is the room where freedom breathes, and you are ready to let the room be generous and a little unruly. A last scene before sleep. A cat crosses the alley, with the elegance of a solved equation. It stops where a fence meets a brick wall, negotiates the seam with a small hop that dignifies the trivial. You admire the math in that one-step force-angle friction, the micro-adjustments of claws doing what claws do best. Sometimes understanding means not blowing a trumpet about the understanding. It means nodding at the beauty of a small system, executing smoothly and letting that nod be the whole ceremony. The clock repairer dreams in ticks and wakes with the sense that something was almost said before the alarm intervened. They unlock the door to the shop and smell the oil that lives in the boards. A customer arrives with a box that was their mother's. When they lift the lid, the seam flickers, the room fills with more than mechanics. Memory changes the composition of air. The repairer listens to the watch like a doctor listens to a chest. The diagnosis is not romantic. Dust dryness, one gear slightly misaligned. The fix is ordinary. The return is not a face softening around gratitude that can't find the right words and doesn't need to. The grad student presents the week's data, not with triumph, but with steadiness. The advisor asks the right annoying questions and is rewarded with proof that the baseline was real. The jitter tamed the apparatus sound. The student walks home under a sky that looks like it has opinions about the semester. They pass the storefront where the couple once leaned. Today, two teenagers do the same, spiraling energy like comets learning gravity. The student feels the seam flicker at the border of their own ambition, career, and life. Will both ask for more than one human has to give. They decide to practice not giving it all at once. Coherence is borrowed, not owned. They know where to find the deposit window in their breath, in their bench, in the quiet between keystrokes. You finally bring the day down to a hush. The device dims. The room owns its own quiet. You lie with the kind of tired that is not a complaint but a receipt. You traded attention for hours and were not swindled. A small inventory appears. One conversation begun, honestly. One hinge mended. One paragraph that didn't lie. One kindness in a line. One acknowledgement of fear. One laugh alone at pepper that went too far. One moment where you let beauty go. Harvested, and loved it anyway. The seam flickers once more at the edge of sleep, and you don't react, don't interpret, don't perform. You let it flicker and fade as edges do when the room of awareness darkens just enough to let the body turn toward repair. Somewhere between waking and gone, you hear a sentence, half-formed observation. Is an act of belonging. It isn't signed. It doesn't ask you to memorize it. It offers itself the way light offers itself to a wall. No fee, no contract, only availability. You can pick it up tomorrow if it's helpful. You can leave it where it is if other words are better suited to the weather. The field will be here either way, humming under the day's chatter. The seam will flicker again at the next border, where your prediction fails kindly. When it does, will you stay long enough to let what is real adjust you gently into place?